That. That.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar hosted by AFPI Karnataka on a very important topic, I would say pertinent topic at this juncture. All of us will agree that the last few months have been the toughest times of our lives as practicing physicians, especially for those who've been in COVID care. On one side, there's been a sudden, unprecedented increase in the number of cases, in the time that we've been spending to help our patients out. Many of my colleagues have been working even post midnight for the last many months without breaks. Whereas on the other hand, we are seeing increasing violence against healthcare workers, especially against doctors. Many government officials themselves, having litigations or accusing doctors, hospitals of negligence and cases against them, and so on. With this imminent third wave coming up, we all should be aware of how we can try and prevent such litigations against us, or even try and tackle them as and when they come by. And for this, we have two really eminent and versatile speakers with us today, Dr. Divya and Dr. Naresh Chawla. I'm so grateful on the behalf of AFPI Karnataka that you both have come and joined and will help us with your insights. At the end of the session, I'm sure all of us will have a good idea on how to again prevent and, if possible, try and go through these difficult times or problems which we could face in our day-to-day practice. Without wasting any time, I'll hand over the session to Dr. Soumya, who is the academic head of AFPI Karnataka, to moderate the session, to introduce the speakers, and carry the session forward. Over to you, Soumya.
Thank you, Dr. Swapna. So good evening, everyone. Let's get straight into the topic without wasting much time to hear the words of wisdom. Dr. Naresh Chawla is our first special guest of honor. He needs no introduction to physicians in India. Dr. Naresh Chawla is a very senior family medicine practitioner. He graduated from Maulana Azad Medical College. He is DNB Family Medicine from 1993, and he settled as a medical practitioner at his residence cum clinic in Pitampura, Delhi. His areas of practice is versatile. He's interested in diabetology, cardiology, and general medicine. And he admits patients in major hospitals in Delhi like Max Hospital, Fortis, etc. He has participated in various DMA conferences, IMA, DNZ conferences, and he's been a specialist in evidence-based practice of medicine for the last 35 years. And simply to say that, he is a very popular medico-social activist, and we are fortunate to have him with us. He's also a medical leader. He's been National Joint Secretary, IMA Headquarters, Vice President, Delhi Medical Council. He's a past president of Delhi Medical Association and IMA Delhi North Zone. And he's been president of Pitampura Medical Forum for many years. I think this is in short what I could talk about Dr. Naresh Chawla. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Soumya. First of all, I am thankful to AFPI Karnataka chapter for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Swapnil, also. So this particular topic is very, very close to my heart, because apart from doing a regular practice of medicine, the medico-legal aspects is not a very new thing, but for last couple of decades, it has become very important. While functioning as the Vice President of Delhi Medical Council, I usually come across a lot of cases of negligence. Some are frank negligences on which, frankly speaking, we as medical specialists or we as general practitioners are less involved. The major suits are against either gynecologists or surgeons or orthopedic surgeons who we are saved. But still, each one of us who is in medical practice, whether in a stand-alone clinic or whether as a clinician, as a part of a larger setup in a big hospital or a nursing home or a corporate hospital, we are supposed to have good knowledge of what are our rights, what are our liabilities. It is extremely important. We clinicians or medical doctors sometimes tend to behave that I have done the good, you may have done good, but this good has to be very, very important, documented. In our practice, what is more important to not to face any medical legal case of negligence is only three important facts. Number one is documentation. Number two is documentation. And number three is also documentation. I clearly remember when I started my practice way back in 1985, we never bothered. We only thought that I have done good. I explained the things to the patient. I have done good from my side. But later on, I realized that all things, whether I am issuing a simple medical certificate, I am issuing a simple death certificate, I am giving clear instructions to a person, whether I have recorded any procedure that I have to do, whether I have taken approval of the patient. All these things have to be recorded. And the latest entrant to this thing is in the times of these corona times is the so-called telemedicine or video consultation. I came across a very embarrassing case of a person around 85 years old, a man, 85 and it is 89 years. I was asked on a call that this is the patient. I said, I'll not be able to see him and he's so far away, etc., etc. But believe me, within 2 to 3 hours of my so-called consultation, the person was no more. Although I did not receive any medical legal notice or any case of negligence, but I did receive a good amount of abuses, which I realized I didn't owe them. But I just meekly submitted to the bereaved family, telling that I was not at fault. But later on, I realized what I could have easily had as I could have recorded everything in my video call itself. I would have instead of all this embarrassment. So, dear colleagues, today we are focusing on the medico-legal aspects in general practice. They are very, very important. I am again saying, yes, surgeons, gynecologists, and orthopedic surgeons, and others may be more liable, but we as general practitioners, we as family physicians, we as family medical specialists are also equally liable. So, as it is said, knowledge is power. So, we are supposed to know in the finest aspects of the, apart from the knowledge of general practice, how to conduct ourselves and how to make ourselves safe, if not immune to the medical legal the cases and in this cruel world. I would again repeat my words. Good medicine is one part, and telling the patient that you are telling is good and saving yourself from any such nuisance like any case of negligence. I'll just inform my dear colleagues before I give it over to Dr. Divya that I am sitting in the Delhi, the heart of India, as your Vice President of Delhi Medical Council. You will not believe it. Any of my colleagues whom I know who has received a case of, who's indicted in a case of medical legal, I mean, any negligence case, his life is so much of hell. It takes normally 3 to 6 months for our counsel to clear a case of negligence. And all these times, the doctor goes through a time of total hell. So, God forbid, we should all try that none of us becomes a victim of any case of negligence and is not caught in any of the medical legal imbroglio. So over to Soumya again to invite Dr. Divya for this today's important lecture.
Thank you, sir, for that a wonderful start. Let me introduce Dr. Divya to entire country of group of general family medicine specialists. Before I introduced, I have some housekeeping announcements to make. Please keep your microphones in the mute mode. And if you have a question to ask, it will be only taken at the end of her presentation. And if you have any queries in between to clarify, you can as well put it in your chat box. Now, to introduce Dr. Divya, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Divya to our entire faculty. AFPI Karnataka chapter is very familiar with Dr. Divya. She is a specialist in healthcare management, and she is a graduate with specialization in hospital management with over 15 years of experience. She has worked in many major hospitals in Bengaluru, the health city of India, like Narayana Hrudayalaya, Ramakrishna Group, and even Apollo Group of Hospitals. And presently, she is working in Kaveri Hospital, handling the medical administration part of it. Her specialization areas includes hospital operations, quality and accreditation, and medico-legal aspects. So over to Dr. Divya.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Soumya. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are very much audible.
Yeah, because I'm sitting in the hospital, I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to wear a mask because I'm sitting in one of the prime areas in the hospital. Thank you, Dr. Soumya, for introducing me. Thank you, Naresh sir. It was just a beautiful introduction. The way you've set the platform, I think all my slides you've covered it in 10 minutes very beautifully. So without taking so much time, I'll share the slides. Can I share this screen, Dr. Soumya?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I hope my slides are visible.
Just one request to all the participants again, please mute your mics. Otherwise, we'll have to mute
I have actually muted everybody. One second.
I just muted the person.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Over to Dr. Divya. Sorry for that intro.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. See, basically, whatever 30 plus slides I have, it doesn't have so much of jargon in it. Medical legal aspects is a an ocean by itself. So within an hour, it is very difficult to cover all the aspects. So I'm not touching on any basic definition of medical legal, basic definitions of jurisprudence, what goes into medical ethics. It is available when you browse on Google. Everything is available. There are a lot of books written by medical legal experts. You can actually go through them. Whatever I'm covering in next 30 to 45 minutes, because I've been a passionate family physician too. So I used to run my own clinic for almost 8+ years. So I've been into hospital administration also, focusing on hospital operations, and then NABH and medical legal per se. And with my experience of establishing this current hospital wherever I'm working, so that is when I realized, I keep talking to my friends and a lot of friends in the industry. So that is when I thought these are the very important aspects that we as practicing doctors should know. In fact, this is not only applicable for family physicians, any doctor for that matter, after MBBS, after a registered medical degree, after taking a Hippocratic oath. These are the things that will really protect us. There were days where only gynecologists, only orthopedicians, as sir said, plastic surgeons were being sued. Now I'll give you a few cases where even the family physicians have been sued for that matter. So my whole presentation will go in the form of case studies. Okay, I have converted into case studies. Then we will discuss. So wherever you want me to stop me, Dr. Soumya said the basic ground rules. So you can keep the set of questions, and then we'll answer it at the end of the session. So I'll just begin my presentation with, we're just speaking about medical legal awareness in the present era, which is very important. It can be COVID, non-COVID, this is evergreen. Whoever is practicing has to follow all these basic rules. So I love this, slide which says medicines cure diseases, but only doctors can cure patients. Correct? So we're all there. We write beautiful prescriptions. So, now we will start with the case studies. I have around 7 or 8, which really, that is where, doctors are, I don't say they're doing mistakes, but, we as doctors, we get emotionally carried away, and then we get, that's how we are getting pulled into all these cases. Case study 1, a patient has been messaging a doctor out of working hours. So this can be a new and an old patient too, since 2 days, saying that he has agonizing pain abdomen since 2 days, 2 episodes of vomiting since 30 minutes, sweating with normal bowel movements. So first day of consultation, one of the family physicians, what he or she does is, it is all, on WhatsApp chat. They don't have video consultation, or, it's not over a phone call. Somehow the patient gets to know this doctor is available on WhatsApp, and then, they start chatting. So because it was out of working hours, the doctor, sends a prescription on WhatsApp saying that, you take the tablet Buscopan, tablet Domstol with, beautiful before food, after food, all that, and then, some diet advice. And then he says, he assures the patient. But day 2, again, the patient comes back and says, I still have a pain abdomen. Doctor adds an antibiotic to the prescription, reassures the patient, don't worry, nothing will happen. So it's all over WhatsApp. There's no, one-to-one conversation between the doctor and the patient. So the patient becomes unconscious in a few hours. Even the patient, he's very compliant with the prescription. He takes all the tablets, he sticks to the diet, but he becomes unconscious. He's rushed to the hospital immediately by the relatives. He's found to have acute appendicitis leading to perforation. The surgeon puts the blame on the doctor, mentioning to the relatives that the doctor should not have treated you on WhatsApp, but could have referred you to the hospital. So this is, as simple as this, because now Government of India has come up with the telemedicine guidelines too. It's a big document. If anybody wants it, and I'll share it, Dr. Samia, she'll put it on your group too. So what, the take home message from this case study is, as far as possible, we will not provide any consultations on WhatsApp, email, or SMS. Even Indian Medical Council has banned too. There are a lot of, posters and educational material which is floating on this. So we should be very careful, because even in the court of law, WhatsApp, email, or SMS is accepted as evidence, but it is permitted only in emergency situations. When I say emergency situation, at the most, I can say dolo, but we have to tell them, these are your warning signs, and please go back to the hospital. And then, we should avoid. So only in emergency situations where, we can stabilize and, immediately make arrangements to shift the patient. And now I know there's an era of video consultations because of COVID. There are a lot of softwares which have come up, but we should be extra vigilant as to, we should draw our lines. This is where, we can treat the patient on videos, and we should also set the expectations before we start the consultation. As soon as, I'm not talking about the payment now, as soon as the patient pays the hospital or the doctor, the doctor-patient contract is set, as soon as the patient enters the doctor's consultation room, there's, the contact between the doctor and the patient. So the doctor and the doctor-patient relationship is set. So that is where we have to be very extra, because there's a special relationship. It is not like, any other relationship where we see in other professions. So we have to be extra vigilant, especially when we are providing consultations on WhatsApp, email, or SMS, and video consultations. So we have to be extra vigilant, and we should draw our lines. Case study 2, social media. This is, I don't say my personal experience, this is what I've seen, on my Facebook and, other, so I'm not too much into social media, but this is out of others' experience. I thought I'll put this because this is another case study. Just a second. Yeah, a family physician, receives a patient. He works upon the patient, and then, arrives at a diagnosis. We can take it as, type 2 diabetes mellitus, or it can be some chronic medical condition. Then the family physician says, you have a condition where you require multiple follow-ups. So he schedules the, follow-up visits accordingly. The way the follow-ups happen, because it's a chronic disease, the doctor and the patient keep meeting very regularly. In due course of time, the doctor-patient relationship gets, diluted. And then doctor talks to other colleagues over phone. This is, I've seen doctors doing this, over phone very casually in front of the patient, has some loose talks with the patient, Are ye ho gaya, oh ho gaya, I had this, in the morning, some loose talks. And they also accept friendship requests on social media. This I've seen, doctors doing it. And the patient lands up in a complication and complains to the doctor. So, when these loose talks are happening, maybe, they've discussed about the diagnosis, they've discussed about the disease. So, and, maybe some kind of, the doctor would have taken calls from the other fellow colleagues. So they would have spoken about the hospital, a patient ko ye ho gaya, that happened, those thoughts. And this is the time where the relatives are very vigilant, they use, because all of us have beautiful Android and iPhones and stuff like that. So they keep recording. They keep, video shoots. So, and this patient also posts, recorded audio files, the loose talks on the social media. Now, anybody can tweet, anybody for that matter, anybody can be tagged. should be extra, and patients either tweet or use social media platforms to voice their complaints or opinions. So the patient or the relatives, they come up with their own opinions, and they use these platforms. So the take home message from this case study is, there's a case on this, which I'll share it with you all. Maybe after this talk is over. We should always avoid loose talks. Even in the hospitals, when I train, my fellow colleagues, I always tell them, when you're sitting in the OP consultation rooms, or you're traveling in the lifts or in the public places, this is something called breach of patient confidentiality. We should not talk about other patients at all. A patient in 403 had this, patient in 303, has this diagnosis, the patient is really bad, all this, this we should actually avoid talking, because when the patient enters, the patient assumes that his information is being kept confidential. And we should always, this is my suggestion, I don't know how you people will take it, we should always think, because doctor and a patient relationship, unless until there are close family or relatives, we should know where to draw our lines. So we should think twice before we accept our social media requests. And yes, this is very important, because we don't know who's recording what. So I would prefer, or I would suggest, put a signage board. In the hospitals, we do this. We put a signage board where we say, mobiles are not allowed. We don't let them record too. So even in the clinics too, please put a signage board. Or if somebody has to record or something, they should take the doctor's permission and be extra vigilant. Please ensure the patient is not, recording anything. Or if it is legally permissible, anything has to be, a photo has to be taken of the prescription. It has to be done in front of the doctor. So case study 3, copy of the patient records. This is very important. Now this has happened. Okay, this case has actually happened, and it has gone against the doctor. So the patient yeah. So the patient during a consultation, during a follow-up, he carries his the family physician meets his patient again, and then he says, I've lost my previous prescription. I don't have a habit of keeping, or I've lost it. But in the follow-up consultation, the doctor even doesn't know that for which condition or what the patient was treated for in the previous consultation. So both the parties have no clue about the previous prescription and the diagnosis. There's another case where this is this case has gone against the doctor, where there is another patient who's been referred by FP. The family physician sees the patient, and then this patient was actually administered an IM injection to the gluteal region by an Ayurvedic doctor a week ago. So he develops swelling in the gluteal region, and then the family physician makes a diagnosis of gluteal abscess, and he gives a first trial of antibiotics and some local application ointments. But the patient symptomatically doesn't improve, and the gluteal abscess increases in size. Then he comes back to the family physician. The family physician says, you require a surgical reference now. This has to be opened and drained. So he gives a referral letter, beautifully documented, addressing to the surgeon close by. But the patient doesn't go to the surgeon. See, because the family physician will lose control once the patient leaves the hospital or the clinic. So the patient doesn't go to the surgeon, ignores the referral letter, and continues the old medication, same antibiotics, if it is Augmentin, again, he will continue taking Augmentin. But when he lands up in a complication, then he realizes, that he should visit the surgeon. But he, visits a surgeon of his choice, that because patients are the decision makers these days, and he undergoes a surgery. Then the patient comes back and files a case against the family physician for not taking suitable action during the first consultation, though the FP, the family physician, had provided the referral letter, which the patient ignored. In spite of that, this patient goes and sues this doctor. But very cleverly, he doesn't produce the FP's family physician's referral letter to the court. Even now, the family physician doesn't have a copy to prove himself. So that is where the doctor was proved negligent. So my sincere suggestion is, we should, even in NABH also, with my experience, we always tell, it can be OP or IP. Once a patient consults in the outpatient, if you have to maintain the continuity of care, if you have to know that what has happened in emergency, what has happened in outpatient, the same outpatient becomes an inpatient. So when we have to, assess or reassess the patient and demonstrate the continuity of care, that is where we have to retain the copy of OP case papers. This most of the hospitals they do follow it, but individual practitioners who run their clinics or diagnostic centers, or they club with other doctors and then have polyclinics. I've seen few clinics fail to do it. There are a few methods where see, if the family physician had retained the copy of the OP case papers and the referral letter, he could have produced. He said, no, I'd given and this patient didn't go. So it is the non-compliant from the patient side. So there are a few methods where you can have this OP case papers. When you have your consultation papers, you can have something called 1+1. So when you're writing, there's a carbon, it's a virtual carbon, and then there's a print, on the second page that you can retain, or you can ask your receptionist or the front office lady to scan the papers. Or if you can afford, a scanner and the photocopy, you can have a Xerox and retain all the outpatient case papers. Suppose these things cannot happen. We are we're sitting in a remote place, or where I don't want to invest on this. So it depends on the person. Okay, at least we can have a register to document the important consultation points, like this patient had come and what you had done, the care plan, refer to so and so hospital to the surgeon, or the patient refused, like this. We have to maintain a register, irrespective of the number of patients that we see. The best is to have EMR in the clinics. So because there are many softwares available in the market now, where you can also have backup of our prescriptions. And I've seen many clinics, including orthopedicians, gynecologists, dermatologists, using EMR in clinics, where the prescription goes and sits in the mobiles of the patients. Yes. Now when we are having the OP case paper, suppose we have a very good compliant patient. The patient comes back with the original consultation paper. We should always ensure we write the second consultation notes right after the first consultation, just to demonstrate the continuity of care. What if the patient loses the first consultation paper and we don't maintain? At least the second consultation paper will save us. So these are the basic steps where we can ensure we keep a copy of the records and save ourselves. God forbid we should not be sued. If we are sued, we have some evidence to show in the court of law. So case study 4, it's refusal of treatment. Refusal of treatment, it is one of the patient rights. The patient can refuse the treatment. So this is a case scenario. This is with my experience I've written when I was running the clinic. The 55-year-old patient is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes mellitus. The family physician counsels the patient and puts him on the relevant antibiotic medications based on the blood reports. But the patient refuses to accept this treatment and walks out of the clinic. He says, 8 is the HbA1c. I can control on diet and medications. I have an Ayurveda doctor, who sees me. I have a home. I mean, it depends on the patient. We cannot force the patient. So, I know a person, who will reverse the diabetes. So, I have seen these kind of patients. There's another, the same patient wants to come back. And then, he started developing, he's able to feel the sugars are high. He says, I have this complaint, this, symptom, and he's totally non-compliant with the treatment based on, and he comes back with FPS and PPBS reports again. And we notice that, his sugars have gone haywire. But me as a doctor will sit and counsel the patient again, but it's of no use. So here, the patient has refused the treatment and, has demonstrated the non-compliance with the treatment. Can the patient refuse to get treated by the doctor? Yes, it is one of the patient rights. In the hospital, we do display patient rights and responsibilities. So, but the patient has refused, we have to document somewhere clearly in the patient record, and we should retain a copy. We should say, there are patients who do sign on this, refusal of treatment. Either you can have a format, pre-printed format. I can help you out with the format, or if you can, write down and have a copy for yourself. And the doctor refused to treat a patient. Yes, in cases of, if I, me as a doctor has some personal emergency, I can tell the patient I have a personal emergency, please go and meet, the relevant. But the referral doctor should be equally competent. Or if, I get a patient where I'm less competent, or I have no experience in handling such patients, I can, educate the patient that, this is my competency. You require, this specialist help, you please go and meet that person. And if there's a breach of, doctor-patient relationship where, the patient really becomes abusive, or the patient doesn't, is non-compliant, doesn't want to listen to the instructions, you can educate the patient, and then, we have a right to refuse the treatment. So these are the case scenarios. But there's a clause to this. We cannot sit and refuse all the patients. If there's an emergency, it can be it can be any, patient for that matter. It can be an abusive patient. It can be a very cordial patient. It can be, patient with a complication. We cannot say yes. We cannot refuse a patient at all in cases of emergency. So case study 5, this is very important. This has happened in Bangalore. Because I got a call after this incident happened. So that's how I know it has happened. So 19-year-old name college, and 19-year-old college student misses his classes for a couple of days. This comes with the students. He approaches a family physician for a medical certificate. So the family physician obliges. I said, yeah, it's okay. It's only a medical certificate, right? I will give you. So he cites the reasons for his absence. Viral fever, dengue, I don't know what he writes, but he writes, citing reasons. This student wouldn't have fallen sick. He would have, taken leave for some other purpose, but he's not consulted any doctor too. So this medical certificate is submitted to the college. The college authorities in the college, they do a verification, and they get to know that it's a fake medical certificate has been issued. So they file a complaint in the medical council against the doctor. So the doctor almost, fought this case for a year, and then, he came, not clean sheet, but, he came out with a warning. So the take-home message is, we should not issue a medical certificate unless until we have seen the patient and advised test, or, we've given a, valid prescription. So we are not legally bound to issue a medical certificate too. So this is the take-home message from the medical certificates. Case study, no, this is very important. Cross reference. I think I have 2 case studies on this. 65. This is again I picked up from one of the cases, medical legal cases. 65 scenario little bit, but this is from the cases, medical legal cases. 65-year-old patient comes to ER with chest pain. He or she is evaluated, and the patient is found to have inferior MI. As the hospital doesn't have cath lab facility and a cardiologist on board, the patient is admitted in the ICU. The patient, it's a nursing home, but nursing home has a full-fledged equipped ICU. So because the hospital doesn't have cath lab and a cardiologist on board, the physician, he's a very senior physician who takes a call and then admits the patient in ICU, thrombolysis patient, and whatever has to be done for 24 to 48 hours, he keeps counseling the patient, he keeps educating the relatives too, and he provides appropriate care. But after 48 hours, the physician feels, he has to be referred to a center which has cath lab and a cardiology center. So he refers the patient to another center which has a cardiology setup. And then the patient undergoes PTC and gets discharged from the second hospital. The patient goes and sues the first hospital for admitting in spite of, not having the cardiology setup. He goes and sues the physician, says that, the doctor knew that I required, the cardiology care. In spite of that, he admitted in his hospital. So the second one, the 42-year-old consults a family physician with pain, abdomen, and bleeding TB. So we get to see all kinds of cases. The patient is referred to a gynecologist for a detailed evaluation. So the FP writes a referral letter and refers the patient to a gynecologist. The patient is found to have uterine malignancy. So the patient comes back to the family physician for the advice, and the FP says, no, the gynecologist has taken the right decision for you. She's done a biopsy, and you found to have uterine malignancy. And then whatever she suggests, you please go ahead and do it, because I know the gynecologist very well. So the gynecologist does a radical hysterectomy, counsels the husband about the diagnosis, and then discharges the patient. But the patient dies after a couple of months. So the patient's husband takes a second opinion meanwhile, because he sees his wife, deteriorating. So he goes, takes a second opinion. That is when, there's another doctor who or she says that an oncosurgeon was not involved when your wife was getting operated, and the patient should have been referred to, there's a window period after which the patient has to undergo chemotherapy. That is where, the wife has succumbed to the disease. So the husband went and sued the FP for not guiding and referring to the appropriate specialist. So these are the 2 cross-referral cases which are very gross. So, and the court, the family physician lost the case because, the family case, he was not extra vigilant when he was referring the case. And the previous case, they said, when you knew that, the cardiologist was not there, the cath lab facility was not there, why did you admit the patient? Both the cases were against the doctors. So we have to be extra, the take-home messages, we have to be extra vigilant while referring the patients to the specialist. I've seen, few doctors, they hold on to the patients, till, and there's something called early warning signs. I keep, using this word. When we see early warning, most of the diseases have, these alarms or, red flags or early warning signs. As soon as we pick up, we have to educate the patients and we have to refer them as soon as, as early as possible. We should not, try to hold on to the patients and then, keep treating them. So yes, again, I keep repeating this. We have to retain a copy of the referral letter or document, register that what we have done with the patients, because I've seen GPs or the family physicians see more than 100, 150, 200 patients in a day or in each consultation. That's how the rush is. So we have to be extra vigilant and retain these documents. So you're done with cross referrals and this injections. Yeah, well, with my practice, I can, with my experience, I can, I want to share this. When I was practicing, there are a lot of patients who used to come and tell me, injection kodi, injection lagado, I'll be all right. It's just, cold of half a day, fever of half a day. I said, what injection you want? They tell me there's an, doctor there who mixes 2 injections and, he administers. So somehow, I don't say about, big, I mean, I see this, this semi-urban or semi-rural areas. That's where they have a, this thing that once the injection is given and the patient is all right. I don't know how many of you have, faced this. Yes, this I got a call from one of my known, this is where, the patient, actually the doctor was not sued, but the relatives were, kind enough. The patient is diagnosed to have urinary tract infection. The FP advises IV antibiotics based on the culture. He does everything, urine culture sensitivity, urine protein, all that. Based on the urine culture sensitivity report, he decides to, administer based on the, high-end antibiotics at the clinic. But the patient lands up in an anaphylactic reaction and is referred to a higher center. But here, the family physician doesn't issue a referral letter at the time of transfer and doesn't document the name of the injection administered in the clinic. But the patient dies due to complications and relatives file a case against the FP. Okay. So this is a very high-end antibiotic, administering in the clinic. We have to be extra vigilant. We should ensure, we have all kinds of facility to, at least, and I've seen remdesivir is being, administered in the clinics. We have seen simple, the patients react to Buscopan, the patients react to injection Perinom. Simple Dolo 650, simple paracetamol, we have seen patients reacting to. So administering high-end antibiotics at the clinic, I would say, we have to be extra vigilant or a no. My sincere suggestion would be to refrain from administering high-end medications at the clinic. Suppose, you're forced to, or, the patient really requires it, or it's a need of the hour, then please give a test dose. After test dose, you can administer iron injections, especially. Give a test dose and then administer the rest of the dose. Avoid cocktail injections, because I spend some time in ER to wherever I work. So ER, the patient, I've seen a couple of patients coming from the clinics. I'm not talking about the hospitals, from standalone clinics, where they say, I went with this complaint and the doctor gave me 2 injections mixed. The doctor loaded 2 injections and there's no prescription. The patient doesn't even know what injection, and the patient lands up in a anaphylactic reaction. So we are not able to ascertain, which drug has caused the allergy, because we have no clue, what the cause is. So this is very important, consent. So I'm not talking about implied, express, informed written consent, not those definitions. Consent, that, when I say consent, it has nothing to do with permission. I know this is a sincere request. Please take informed consent before any procedure, for that matter. I know a lot of clinics, see this we follow in hospitals, but when it comes to clinics, I've seen, suturings happening, dressings happening, cannulations happening, catheterizations happening, incision and drainage is happening. So, make it it's a healthy practice to, educate the patient that I am doing this. So, I want your consent to do this. So, we have, few hospitals, suppose a radiologist has to do a transvaginal scan. we take consent from the female that, we have a male sonologist. So, we need your consent because he will do your transvaginal scan. So to that extent, we take consent from the patient. If there is a refusal of treatment, either you can have a format with you or please document and take informed written consent that, I've explained all the alternatives. I've explained the risks and benefits. I've explained the risks, and the untoward consequences, anything for that matter. Please document everything in detail and ask the patient to sign. Anything that you ask them to write, it has to be signed, named, we call SNDT format. It has to be signed, name of the doctor should be written, it has to be dated and timed. Otherwise, we will not know when this event has happened. Suppose we are, suppose we have, care plans when we are deciding on the modes of treatment. So mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, mode 4, we explain, but the patient doesn't want to accept mode 1, but we know that is good for the patient because, now the patients are the decision makers, the relatives are the decision makers. So when they opt for other alternatives, you take an informed written consent that, mode 1 was quite suitable, but mode 2, mode 3 was, accepted by the patient. How do we take? Either it can be written, as sir said, audio visual. All of us carry Android mobiles or iPhones, so we can take video consent and keep a copy of it. But we should educate the patient that we are doing this video recording. When we're taking testimonials in the hospitals, what we do, we take the consent from the patient. We tell them, that we are taking your video. So we take a consent even for testimonial videos. And then it can be a high risk case, it can be a low risk case, no risk case. No disease for that matter doesn't, I don't say it is risk free, but written consent or AV mode consent is always better. But in an emergency, I agree, implied consent is there. The patient or the relative is not, and then we go ahead and treat the patient. But when we have time, please do this. So these are the take-home messages when it comes to consent. Prescription guidelines. So consent, I'll tell you one more interesting case. I was, when I was going through, I read, few journals when it comes to medical legal. The patient, one lady, mother underwent hysterectomy, total abdominal hysterectomy. I don't remember whether oophorectomy was there, I don't remember. But, the hospital followed all the guidelines, everything, they had an SOP in place, they followed everything, but they didn't take the patient's signature, okay? I don't know what the patient was doing. So I don't know what was the relationship between the son and the mother, how cordial it was. But the patient underwent TH, patient recovered beautifully. The patient, followed all the post-op instructions, came back home. She, went back and sued the hospital saying that, my consent was not taken. Where is my signature on the consent papers? So I don't know what happened after the discharge. And, that is how, this was really, so always, if the patient is conscious and oriented, if the patient is, mentally stable, please take, consent from the patients. If the patient is, don't fit into this criteria, then, the nearest legal guardian will be there, legal, spouse, brother, sister, parents. So you can take, consent from them. Yeah, these are the prescription guidelines. I got hold of this, somebody had followed me, on this, on my WhatsApp. So, they were testing my, reading skills because they thought, whether I could decode this. So I could really not, decode. And whatever prescription guidelines I am telling, because I know there's a saying in India which says, a doctor's prescription can be read only by a pharmacist. So my son keeps asking me, looking at my handwriting, he says, because whatever I write, how come, because I use, all these prescription guidelines, he always, asks the pharmacist close by, uncle, when you're doing a course in a pharmacy, are you, trained to read doctor's handwritings? Because my Amma's handwriting is, pretty bad. Only prescription she uses capitals, otherwise I'm not able to read her handwriting at all. So, this is what I've, learned from her, and that pharmacist always, laughs at him. So these are the prescription guidelines where, one, we don't make mistakes. The patients also don't mistakes while, being confident with the prescription. These are actually given by Medical Council of India. And even in the hospitals, we do follow, but hospitals also, we try to educate the consultants and the residents and everywhere. And even I've seen a couple of, standalone clinics, doctors running the standalone clinics. These guidelines are, not strictly followed. So we have to make it a mandate to write prescriptions legibly and always use capital letters or tallman letters. Use of generic names instead of brand names. That is where, the pharmacists, the patients are really getting confused. I had a few patients coming back and saying, you had written this, and but the pharmacist gave me this. So, and then see, I have seen, many of the doctors writing, suppose they write Augmentin, 625 mg, they write amoxicillin so and so gram, and then clavulanic acid so and so. When they write, the anti-diabetic medicine, which has three molecules, they mention, metformin is 500 mg, vildagliptin is so much mg, and then it has, like that. So you write, and then, so use of generic names below the brand name will always help the patient too. Suppose the brand name is not available, he goes to another place, and then he wants to buy the medicine. He can go with the content. Most of the patients are educated. We can educate the patient saying that, I've written a brand name, but I've written the content, the molecules too. So, and then, if you don't find this brand name, you please, whichever tablet has this brand name, or you can get back to me, I'll confirm. Yes, completion of a prescription. I've seen many of the prescriptions because my father used to go to family physician close by. The drug name is clearly written, the dosage frequency is not clearly written, the route is not written, duration is not written, or the relationship with the food is not written. I've seen many anti-diabetic medications being taken after food, but they're supposed to be taken before food. I've seen Pantorac, being taken, pantoprazole, ranitidine being taken after food, because the instructions are not clear. But I've seen a lot of doctors writing in their native, the local language in Kannada, ಊಟಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ, ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನದ ಊಟಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ, ದೋಪಹರಕ್ಕೆ ಖಾನೆಗೆ ಪೆಹಲೆ, ನಾಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಪೆಹಲೆ, like that. There are a lot of doctors who do this also, but many doctors, who don't complete the prescription. So, and there are a lot of confusing abbreviations, especially, when we are writing insulin, the way we write units, the way we write, 2.0 or 3.0, 30 can become 3.0. So we should avoid a lot of abbreviations. Allergy to medications. This generally, I hardly see, allergies being mentioned on the prescriptions. Or we can have a printed format where, we sit and, really document. So when you have a ready rector in front of you, so you will never miss allergy. I have to write no known drug allergy, or the patient is allergic so and so. This commonly happens with, I don't know why it happens with the dentists. I have received around 4 or 5 calls on this, where the patients landed up in my own area, because when I used to do home visits, the dentists were were not asking for allergies, where the patient is allergic to amoxicillin, and the dentist's favorite antibiotic, whatever I've seen, is Augmentin. So allergy has to be documented, and then we have to educate the patient. Even the patients are not educated. When I talk to a few patients, I say, I met a doctor, but the doctor never told me that, this allergy is very important. I know I should have this in my mind. So, and I always suggest everybody to, conduct something called audits. When we understand these are the guidelines that we have to follow, okay, and we should audit and see whether we are complying, and then, do a self-assessment. So that will really help us at the end of the day, because all of us are working for patients, and, we are, for us, patient care is utmost important. All right, these are the few, suggestions. I think few more slides. How can we avoid being sued or pulled to the courts of law? Naresh sir has already, it is documentation. I will add another one: communication. This is what, I keep talking, even in the hospitals, wherever, whomever I spoke to. It is as simple as this. If you have not documented, we have not done the job. It is as simple as this. If I have done something, I have to document. So whenever I reiterate this many times, whatever I communicate, I tell them, whatever you communicate, you please document. Whatever you document, please communicate. It can be condition of the patient, it can be, the diagnosis, it can be, the investigations, it can be follow-up. I would have written on the follow-up papers or the prescription, but I failed to communicate. So this is very important. Whatever I communicate, I have to document. Whatever I document has to be communicated. How do we do it? How do I communicate? Repeated counseling sessions till the patient or the relatives understand, both written in AV modes, audio visual. So we can go show them some educational videos, or we can give them some, the communication is appropriate, or the message is understood. So what do I do with the documents? I ensure my documents are complete. The documents have to be complete. I have to be very accurate when I'm taking the history. So the doctors have to be accurate when eliciting the history from the patient. The records have to be legible. If the doctors don't have EMR or that's okay, but whatever we write has to be legible, and we have to retain a copy of the records. That is very important. whoever is not following, you just, this is a food for the thought. Please ensure, you have some kind of a mechanism to retain, the copy of the records. All right, this is what I wanted to say, because these were the, burning issues so far, that is where, we were lacking. So that's what I thought. I'll just, put these case studies across. So now I think the forum is open for question and answers. Dr. Swami, can we take a couple of questions?
Dr. Soumya, in fact, Dr. Divya has delivered a wonderful lecture from the physician, a family physician point of view. First, not the comments or observation, but a little additions I'd like to make. First thing, do you permit me, Dr. Soumya?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Number one is, please, normally the trust between doctor and patient is the most moot point, and we always must make sure the trust is retained. And sometimes I have realized in last 3.5 decades long of my medical practices, sometimes you trust the patient a little too much. So even if the patient's doctor saab, aap laga do, kuch nahi hoga. Doctor will say the situation is bad, and you are finding situation is doctor is finding no, I should not give it, and the patient practically sometimes, or the attendants or the legal guardians whosoever they practically force you to do this, and kuch nahi hoga. To never do it, always take an informed written or AV consent. If you feel otherwise, never do any procedure, even if it is a simple injection. Even I know of patient having come to the doctor with a simple breathlessness, and you feel, yeah, it is not a case of simple bronchial asthma. He is kind of in a cardiac failure, and you inject anything and the patient dies. The liability is on you. So always make sure, if you have died, the final word should be in your hands. After having taken, explain to the risk to the patient, only do the procedure, otherwise don't do it. Another aspect which I would like to emphasize, we all are very fond of writing titles. A plain MBBS doctor writes himself, I am a diabetes specialist. A plain MD medicine writes himself to be a cardiologist. A plain DNP in family medicine writes himself to be a sugar specialist or a diabetologist or cardiologist. In Delhi Medical Council, I am, and again, a plain MBBS lady doctor writing herself to be a gynecologist and obstetrician. Delhi Medical Council at present is loaded with all these questions, that how could a simple MBBS lady doctor claim to be obstetrician? So I say simple advice to all my colleagues is, never write yourself to be a specialist. Even if you have some special interest, write it like this. For example, I am an MBBS. I am DOMS also, since I am not writing doing the ortho practice. I do not write myself to be a ophthalmologist. I am a DNP, but since I am interested in doing chronic disease, so I write myself a family medicine specialist with special interest in chronic diseases, diabetology, etc., etc. This is, I don't know what the other councils, state councils are finding. Delhi Medical Council at present is flooded with patients, and nobody can make a claim of beyond his qualification. This is very, very important, and I'm sure other medical council will have the same problem. So this is what just wanted to add. Thank you so much for permitting me and allowed me to add this thing.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal, for those words of wisdom. I have a couple of things for both of you before we get into the session proper Q&A. What are your comments on mob violence in clinical practice?
Shall I answer, Dr. Soumya?
Yes, sir. You can go ahead.
Please believe me, Delhi has had a good number of cases of mob violence. I have been fortunate till now. I have never had at my clinic, but I have been, since I am an association man, a medical association man, I have visited number of patients, but believe me, none at a family physician. They were all either gynecologists or surgeons, etc. As far as the mob violence is concerned, again the same thing. Even if such a thing occurs, my advice to my colleagues is, number one, do not run away, number one. Number two, always have, this is what we call in our colony in Pitampura, we have made the so-called networking of doctors, networking of family physicians, networking of all kinds of doctors. You cannot handle the mob violence singly. say a case occurred only hardly, I would say, just before the corona second wave came. I was called. Believe me, it was handled very nicely. The person had some problem and the patient died. It was a nursing home. Immediately, he gave a number to the chief area coordinator of that zone, who immediately contacted around 20 doctors within a span of hardly 3 to 4 minutes, by one giving the responsibility of other giving the responsibility to the other. And believe me, within a span of 5 to 7 minutes, there were 20 doctors who were there. Their cars had come, and you get even if that patient, this particular patient, is not your patient, you make some connections, and at the same time start counseling. Start counseling means tell them how it has happened. Do not run away. It's a very important. Until unless it is the mob is absolutely violent, do not run away with the situation. Plus, meanwhile, to inform the police. These are simple things, but whatever cases I have handled in last, I would say, 3 decades, everyone was solved by involving the local doctors of the same colony by networking. But they should come immediately, not that they come to the doctor's rescue, say, couple of hours later. They have to come within 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. And I think this is a very important thing, because they can easily de-stress the situation. We can easily explain because sometimes the relatives and the attendants are so unnerved and so, in a bad mood, that you have to just reason with them and it can be solved.
Thank you, Dr. Bansa.
Dr. Chawla, Dr. Chawla.
Sorry, Dr. Chawla. Dr. Divya, what are your comments from your experience in hospital setting whenever there is a mob violence? Anything else we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I was talking about, documentation and communication. Those are the two, saviors actually for us. So I've already said, whatever we communicate, we document, and whatever we document, we communicate, and we should always take acknowledgement, from the patient or the relative side that, this is what we've done. And second, when I was working on a couple of projects, we were setting up our, the consultation room. That is when, when I was designing my own clinic, somebody was told me, certain, east direction, you certain, business, all that, those, vast, even my own clinic owner used to come and tell me, are you sit in east direction, that is good for this thing, south, all that. But I fail to realize that, when there's a abusive patient, or when there's, I should be the first person to walk out, because I'll be locking myself. So that is where, when I give suggestions to, design the counseling rooms in the hospitals or the clinics, we should be in a position. I've seen most of the clinics, even my clinic was there, where I suppose as an abusive patient, I get locked. I'll not be able to step out. So the design of the clinic can be changed, and, we can always educate and counsel, because I've not seen family physicians being, subjected to all this, victimized for all this. But wherever, again, this is how we can prevent from, pick up the early warning signs, and then, refer the patients to, multidisciplinary approach, because there are a lot of patients who require, multidisciplinary.
Yes, doctor. Yeah, Dr. Divya, do you recommend the AV counseling session even in standalone clinics?
We can. Yes.
Because family medicine specialists are better counselors, and there is a lot of trust among your patients for everything. Absolutely. Even to choose the type of cataract surgery, they come to you many a times asking your words of wisdom. So do you recommend?
Absolutely. See, it is again, it depends on the situation. Like, when we're talking to the patient, when we try to establish a relationship, we'll be able to make an initial assessment, whether, how this patient is, whether, I'm not saying it is a risk, but, should I actually go ahead and, save this video for, some untoward forces, because any treatment for that matter carries some risk. So the assessment, if the patient is abusive, or the patient is too interrogative, or, the patient is too dependent on Dr. Google, because I see, a lot of patients coming with, iPads, coming with the diagnosis and the prescription. So assess the patient and the relatives as soon as we establish relationship, and, take a decision of taking audio visual. Even sitting in standalone clinics, we can have video consultations. Video recording of the educational sessions. We can have. But, we should always inform the patient and educate the patient that, I'm taking a video of this conversation.
Okay. Now
and
let's go
in Medical Protection Act too. I think, a couple of the states have, implemented this. I've already shared it with you. So,
okay.
there are a lot of things when the mob violence happens. How do we protect ourselves? What is the punishment? What is what is bailable, non-bailable? There are a lot of guidelines. You can share it with them. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Swapna has a question now. Over to both the speakers. You can tell whoever wants to take up. Are we liable for negligence if we ignore an SMS or a WhatsApp message regarding a symptom sent by a patient, and if he or she deteriorates later?
In my opinion, I would say, Dr. Somya, we are not. Frankly speaking, in our busy practices, there are no guidelines by the courts or anyone for that matter that if supposing even if I do not get to time to see the messages or the WhatsApp message, or number two, for example, my mobile battery goes off or whatever things. Although there are no written guidelines on this, but there cannot be any liability because a SMS or a WhatsApp message cannot be a final communication. It has to be a call. You can be liable not to listen to a call. That doctor, I called you and you did not listen. You did not pick up my phone. You may be liable, but you cannot be, Dr. Sopana, you cannot be made liable on a simple SMS or a WhatsApp message. This is what is my opinion.
Okay. Dr. Poddar wanted to say something. We'll just unmute him.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Dr. Divya and Dr. Chawla, for an excellent discussion. I'm Dr. Poddar from Delhi. First thing, in many cases, Dr. Divya, you discussed, the finally operating doctor told the patient that your previous doctor's advice was not good. So one thing we must keep in mind, we should never say against the doctors.
Absolutely.
In
Yes.
cases the surgeon said or the cardiologist said, your previous
Yes.
treatment was okay. So we should stop this habit of saying against our colleagues that was not okay. Even if you find that treatment was not okay, you should be silent. If you are not defending, at least you should be silent. You say, my advice is this. Then second thing, in first case you discuss appendicular perforation. I think that was not the fit case for teleconsultation. And here, here the doctor consulted not only once, twice. The next day also he then advised some medicine. Here he should have done, he can advise on an emergency some medicine, then he should have advised to go to hospital for a check.
Yes.
That advice, so here he is at fault, I will say, but that surgeon should not tell the patient. But
Absolutely.
Yeah, very true.
Your old patient and teleconsultation is new patients, you can only advise emergency treatment, then you should advise to go for test or whatever consultation. That's only my submission. Thank you.
I'll just add to Somya add to Dr. Poddar, is my colleague in Delhi only. He has used the word, we doctors are normally supposed to be saying many bad comments which should be totally avoided. Believe me, when sitting in Delhi Medical Council, I have come across any case of negligence is guided by a fellow colleague only. So he tells, this doctor did a wrong to you. So believe me, tomorrow he is the victim. Today, next person is the victim. So make sure we should never make casual remarks against our colleagues ever. Even if you feel that particular doctor has done a total mistake, it was a bad diagnosis. So never disclose this thing in front of the patient. Rather say it, yes, he has seen it very nicely. We often discuss this thing among colleagues, informally also discuss. Make sure these remarks are very, very bad. Always say that I'll try to do better. मैं आपको अच्छा करके दिखाऊंगा, ऐसा कहिएगा, ऐसा कभी मत कहिए कि उसने गलती की है, मैं ऐसा कभी मत करो. This is what we normally do, because in the rivalries and medical world are very well known, and these casual rivalries, they will kill all of us. So we should always make sure that we should, as Dr. Divya said, we should not talk casual in front of patients, and particularly remarking casually about the other colleagues and particularly about the previous doctor. This can be very, very bad. We should totally avoid it.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh and Dr. Divya and Dr. Poddar, for raising the concerns about professionalism, which is very important in our community. And over to next question by Dr. Mohan. When we are working in an extraordinary situation like the present peak pandemic, does the practitioner have a legal liability?
As far as if I am to answer this question, frankly speaking, we do not have any legal cover or something. I clearly remember in the just bygone second wave of this corona, I happened to, in fact, I normally was doing the hybrid practice. It was online also and physical also, because since my clinic is residential clinic, so I was used to see a lot of patients, and sometimes the rush used to be too much. And I always number of times I felt that I was not doing justice with my patient because there were too many. So, but I can pretty well refuse the patient. But in sometimes the situation in the clinic is such you can't even refuse. I will not see. You cannot say that. Oh, supposedly the patients are known to you for last couple of years or decades. So I think the only thing left to you is that how you adjust. As Dr. Mohan, as goes to my knowledge, there is no legal cover at all. It is only your adjustment, how you communicate to the patient, how you adjust and try to see as many patients without harming the interest of yours also as the patient.
Okay. Sir, and moving on to the next question. There is a comment saying that documentation is the most important aspect in general practice. Definitely, it is highlighted by all our esteemed members. Moving to the next one. Do patients have to produce case papers while complaining against the treating doctor?
You see, whenever we receive any complaint in the any medical council anywhere in the world or in the anywhere in India, obviously the papers have to be produced. So the complaint cannot be verbal by any case. It has to be a fully documented complaint. So I think the patient, if he alleges anything, a case of negligence against a particular doctor, so it cannot be verbal. It has to be written, and it has to be the complainant has to produce some papers before any such complaint can be taken. As far as I know, my role in Delhi Medical Council.
Yes, Dr. Chawla. Our concerns here are: can a WhatsApp, photo or a snapshot of prescription be produced in the court as a case paper against the treating doctor?
Till now, as it goes to my knowledge, it has never happened, and we don't even accept that. It has to be a proper paper. A WhatsApp image cannot be taken as a complaint.
Okay. The next question is to Dr. Divya. Dr. Naveen wants to know, is it okay to write our notes in short forms, standard or non-standard? Dr. Naveen has also raised his hand. You can probably unmute yourself to express more. Dr. Naveen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Dr.
Yes, sir.
Naveen. Can you just explain the scenario, please? See, because I just wanted to understand.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Naveen here.
Whether you
See,
work.
many times I've been a practitioner for the last family physician for the last 36 years, and I have been very meticulous about documenting all my patients for at least the last 7-8 years. See, when we write notes for patients and we write a diagnosis, when I write for the patient, we always write, in the prescription, just like doctor mentioned, I would document everything correctly, at least write the gist of the symptoms. What are the symptoms the patient has come for, how many days, etc. And where it's appropriate, much more elaborate description of the negative history also. And but when we're writing on, I have a daily case register, and there I just, besides writing the patient's age, date, the age, my diagnosis, I just make short notes of, example, what medicines. For example, if it's just paracetamol, I may just put a P there, knowing there's a paracetamol. Now, when this sort of a document is called upon, say in court or somewhere else, to see for what the reason are, is it adequate, or is it that we have to write more completely, what we have advised?
See, as long as you can justify. See, when we have approved list of observations, we always follow an authority called ISMP, Institute for Safe Medicine Practices. So they've actually given list of abbreviations approved. Do not use use these kind of abbreviations. Or if you feel you can justify and you're able to recognize, because it would have happened 6 months ago, a month ago, when we see 100+ patients, it is very difficult to, or you can have on the register, the first page of the register, where you can say, when you say P, it is paracetamol. You've seen abbreviations, glossaries in many of the textbooks and the reference books. You can have that, as a ready reckoner. That is what, I would suggest as of now, the way you ask, one kind of a list where you say, P is NAD is no abnormal deficits. When I write SCNS, central nervous system, NFND is, no focal neurological deficits. You can have a list of abbreviations, approved abbreviations. For yourself, it is your list of approved abbreviations. So, because it will save your time also. I can understand when you're writing everything in the register, even time is also, very precious because patient care comes first. So, this is a simple way where, you can avoid excessive documentation. You can continue with the current practice.
Yes.
Just
I have another.
There was one more point which I would like to put to Dr. Naresh Chawla.
Yes.
Doctor, see, I'm practicing in Bangalore, and it's very much in not the heart of the city, but still very much a part of the heart of the city. Now, in the area, if you see, for example, let's just take there are 50 doctors. There may 40 of these doctors or 45 of these doctors are all Ayush doctors. Mainly Ayurvedic doctors, a splattering of homeopaths, and very few Siddha or Unani doctors. Now, when you take a prescription from any of these doctors' clinic and have a look at it, not one of these doctors prescribe something from their own system of medicine. They're all allopathic drugs that they use completely. And the little bit that they know is mostly from the medical reps and things like that. Now, they often you find that I've seen that, they would have something like 3 vials, maybe one of dexamethasone, one of gentamicin, and one of, say, for example, diclofenac. And the patient comes with a problem and they load 2 cc of this, 3 cc of this, 1 cc of this, and just inject the patient. And by giving that, the patient, he's got his steroids, he's got a diclofenac, and he's absolutely comfortable. He sees this patient is God. He sees this doctor is God, and that he's giving me so much relief in no time. And they believe that injections are the cure for everything. So all patients go to them. Now, having said that, these patients, very often when they deteriorate and something goes wrong, it may be 2-3 days later, and they will think, it's a normal course of the disease, and they go, to hire maybe an MBBS doctor, etc. They often don't come to us as first stop, because we charge significantly more than what these doctors charge. So they come to us and later in the disease probably with complications, and then they expect miracle cures. That often happens. And what happens in the situation there, like doctor was saying, that in an area, a group of doctors get together to help each other when there is a problem. The point is, if we get together with these doctors, you can imagine the unethical practice which is absolutely that they carry out. And if something goes wrong, I won't have the conscience to say I would support the such and such a doctor. I know if I have a fellow doctor who's another MBBS doctor, I know he's done the right thing and I know what he has done, I would definitely stand by him. But when it comes to these doctors, I don't think I would be like, I would to, and I would like to ask Dr. Naresh Chawla that in this team of doctors that are there, are they just, allopathic doctors, or the other doctors also there?
Dr. Naveen, I'll answer your question in 4 parts. Believe me, you raised a very relevant thing, which is called quackery. And believe me, what Baba Ramdev has been doing, and I'm battling him for last 2 weeks. I have given not less than more than a dozen television interviews in the same regard. As you asked me, first part, that you in your vicinity, there are mostly Ayush doctors and they are doing allopathic practice. Obviously, they are covered in the so-called anti-quackery law of their land. We in Delhi also, we have the anti-quackery law, but believe me, it is not followed. In Delhi, all the quacks are mostly these BMS people, or they are not even BMS. They are nothing. They are only RMPs, or they are only compounders who may have deserted your clinic some time back, and they say, I am also a doctor. So there are 3. We divide the quacks in 3. Number 1, who are absolutely unqualified. Number 2, who are BAMS or BHMS, and they do allopathic practice. And worse still is that since they use steroids openly, they become more popular than you. That ये doctor तो MBBS doctor से जल्दी भी ठीक कर देता है और सस्ता भी कर देता है. I am aware of this thing right in the heart of Delhi itself. First thing, you're asking me, do I include these people in my list of people whom I can involve in the so-called network? Answer is not at all. We remain away from them. But there are pockets of in everywhere, whether it is Bengaluru or Kolkata or Mumbai or Delhi. There are pockets where the quacks are more. There are other places where the quacks are less and the qualified doctors are more. So one has to be careful. You ask me, should you depend on them? Never, never. Shun them, avoid them, and inform. Most important role which Dr. Naveen you can do is educate the people around you. This is what I am. This is what they are. Education. Believe me, again, I am an anti-quackery activist. In 1997, I sat on fast at Rajghat for 3 all days when Dr. Harshvardhan, who is the Health Minister of India now, even at that time, who was the Health Minister of Delhi, he told us that we'll bring an anti-quackery law. And it could never come. Then they told us we will bring the Medical Council Act. You become the member of Delhi Medical Council, and the quacks will go. They never went. And believe me, the quacks are only rising because the uneducated people in India are too many. That is why the people like this Baba Ramdev, etc., are driving. So we, as qualified medical professionals, we have to have our own lobbies, number one, but we are duty bound to inform and educate the patients. That मैं स्टेरॉइड नहीं देता हूँ, ये आदमी आपको स्टेरॉइड देता है, ये गलत है. तो ये एक दिन में this thing cannot be done in one day. But if it is done over a period of time, even the patients also understand that Dr. Naveen is a qualified doctor. He takes a proper history. He does a proper examination. He does a proper good case solving. I'm sure even patients also understand this language.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Naresh, for that wonderful insight, because integrated media practitioners in India, that itself is a big topic. And if you don't mind, we'll go over to other interesting sessions which our participants want to clear. Many of them want to know, especially Dr. Sanjay, if teleconsultation, that is EMR, has a legal immunity. Are they here to stay, or it is only specially permitted from pandemic point of view? And also if video consultation through app is permitted. Dr. Divya, if you can answer. Hello?
I've just unmuted myself. Video consultations, yes, it is permissible because we are going through this pandemic now. But again, we
Dr.
can
Divya,
not
we
treat the
can't hear
patient
you.
100%.
There is some.
Just a second. You're able to hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
I can hear.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so when it comes to video consultations, because we're going through this, terrible pandemic as of now, yes, we can, do video consultations on the app. And before pandemic also, I know many companies which have come up with beautiful apps where, the doctors do have video consultations. But again, we should draw the lines. We should know, where, the patient requires actual referral, where the patient actually requires, examination. That is when you have to guide the patient and say, this is where you require, the examination, please go visit the doctor. We cannot hold on to the patient till, the patient did it. So video consultation, yes, we can go ahead and do it. Again, we should know where to draw the lines. Sir, Naresh, sir, anything from your side?
Yes,
Correct. The Telemedicine Society of India has definitely defined some guidelines. And I think from AFPI Karnataka chapter also, we have, added the inputs of Telemedicine Society of India, and we have published a record of what are the do's and don'ts of our responsibilities from general practitioners' point of view during the pandemic. And I think we can share the document. Moving on to the next question, is it legal to record a video consultation, even by a patient? I think this question is very interesting and very important.
Dr. Somya, kindly permit me to answer the previous question first. Believe me, the Medical Council of India earlier and the National Medical Commission now, they both have permitted the so-called telemedicine. But there are two parts of telemedicine. One is telemedicine is that there is when it is given to patients who far-flung areas when there is no doctor around. These days in last pandemic, only in the second wave, I was practically forced by many of my patients who were earlier visiting me. They said, doctor, we cannot come. Why can't you give us advice online? But I always told them that I am a little less comfortable, and I sometimes felt that diagnoses are missed also. So it should remain a doctor's prerogative to say yes or no to a online consultation if it is sought. So believe me, when doctors have not be to they have not to be, I wouldn't use the word greedy, but if you feel uncomfortable that this advice I may not be able to give online, so always ask the patient to come. And as far as Dr. Somya was asking, is it permitted? It is 100% permitted, and in the days to come, is going to rise. You know why it's going to rise? Because the so-called consumerist society, people will think, why go to the place, or go to the doctor, wait in the waiting chamber, and spend more time? Why not seek the advice online? So as the society enters the so-called convenient and comfortable zone, more and more people are likely to seek online consultations. And the second
Even
part,
WhatsApp video consultation, Dr. Chawla?
yeah, I think they are, because again, these are the times of going to times of comfort zone and
Dr.
convenience.
Subir, you're not very audible. The audio was breaking in between.
And as far as you asking the because the legal aspects of recording, to anybody, whether it is a patient or it is the doctor, he or she has to seek permission, informed consent. Without informed consent, you cannot record anything. It is on both ways, patient side also and doctor side also.
Oh. Hello, Dr. Naresh.
Yeah, I can listen to you.
Yes. So what they have another question. Yeah. If a patient runs away without paying the bills, can he approach the police or consumer court?
Till now, in
Can
40 years,
that's what I think
in
the
40,
Dr.
in
Prakash
40,
wanted to know.
in 40 years of my medical practice, it has happened only very rare, and I have never approached police. Frankly speaking, you have to, if it is not a big sum of money, you better bear the loss rather than running to the police. I'll say it in the lighter way. If obviously you are a nursing home owner and he has run away with paying a couple of thousands, a couple of lakhs, obviously you have to approach the court or the police and the law. But if it is a small amount, as is supposed to be in the so-called family medicine or the family physician's practice, I think I would rather keep my comments reserved on that.
I have a question for Dr. Divya.
Yes,
may
sir,
I ask?
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
My question is, if I am doing a WhatsApp video consultation, how do I maintain records of the patient?
You can ask the patient to send all the records on the WhatsApp itself, so that you have a soft copy with you. See,
Dr. Divya, do we have to retain all these records? Because in the pandemic, many keep sending so many snapshots of their records. How do we retain all this data? It becomes really challenging, right?
See, as far as this thing, as far as you have a copy of the records, it's well and good. See, because if you have to refer back, one, you will have some kind of a document. Second, if you have to retain, I always insist on retaining the copy of the records. So better to have a copy of the records on your WhatsApp, on your mobile, because you get you get a soft copy of all the reports. This was Dr. Subir, right?
Correct. Yeah, Dr. Subir.
Yeah, Dr. Subir. This is what you wanted to know, right? When when you're having a WhatsApp conversation, how do you maintain the copy of the records?
Yeah, you need a lot of space, in which case, because so much would be adding on. But again, if it has to be done, it has to be done.
No, if you think it is really relevant, it's again, you are the best judge at that point of time. If you really think you have to retain it, and then this requires in providing continuity of care, or second, you have to retain, then you can retain. Otherwise, it depends on you again. It's case to case basis when you're providing the video consultations or WhatsApp. So you can take the call at that point of time.
So if I'm writing a prescription, I should take a snapshot of that and send it across in my WhatsApp patient. Is that how it happens? Okay.
Yeah. Better to retain, the soft copy of the prescriptions.
Thank you.
So there is another interesting question by Dr. Kritika. What can be done if patient secretly records the consultation conversation or conversations and you accidentally happen to find out?
Dr. Somya, shall I answer this question?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sir.
Dr. Kritika, this is illegal. So there's criminal action can always be done. And if you find out, you can only repudiate the patient or whatever. I think, or you can ask them not give him or the advice. Frankly speaking, it is illegal. Illegal means illegal. It is criminal. So obviously you can refuse to take such a patient or repudiate that such why was such being done with some bad intention or whatever. So I think there are no laws governing all this. So illegal means illegal only. The patient can be disowned or can be refused the treatment. That's the worst you can do to that patient.
Okay, thank you. That's great, sir. And moving on to probably one of the last questions. I'm sure many of our participants have a lot of questions, but just to inform all of you, I'm sure we get a lot of doubts, and Dr. Divya and Dr. Naresh Chawla, now they are very familiar to us, and definitely we can post all our queries personally in their WhatsApp or talk to them. Probably I'm taking the liberty, considering both of you, to help us out, to ease us our difficult situation if the time demands. And the last question would be, which is very important, please tell us about the norms of certifying death by a general practitioner, especially when we have not seen the patient or not seen the patient for a long time, or if the patient is our relative or it's an old patient, especially keeping the pandemic perspective.
Dr. Somya, it is very clear. Whether it is a patient who is a relative or your neighbor or your actual patient. Since I am in practice for a long time, number of times I have woken up at in the midnight at 3 o'clock. Doctor साहब घर के देख लीजिएगा, शायद हिल नहीं रहे हैं. तो simple बात है कि never give a death certificate without actually seeing the patient. Never be it a relative or be it a neighbor or be it a this thing को हिल नहीं रहा है. Up certificate देना, never. I have in my life never given a single death certificate, actually never physically having seen the patient. Plus, obviously, the death has to be a complete death. It has to be a brain death. One must make sure it has to be a brain death. The last modality to be tested is the pupils. Pupils, if they are dilated, fixed dilated pupil is the last thing which is to be seen, and it should be properly verified. As far as you're asking the other aspects, any poisonings or any unnatural cause of death, that we are not supposed to see. If you feel on examination, if you have a reason to suspect any such thing, which rarely happens, it has never happened with me even once in the last 40 years. If you have a reason to suspect any unnatural cause of death, any poisoning or any hanging or anything else, obviously then you are supposed to inform the police, etc. Since I have not had a single patient of this type, so I'll not comment on that, but you should be open to such things also. So your observation has to be strong if it is a natural cause or a natural cause. Otherwise, if it is a natural cause, then obviously you ascertain the death and you confirm it and give a certificate.
Yes, sir. Dr. Chawla, Dr. Captain Prabhakar has another valid query with respect to this. Is it legal to send a screenshot of this medical certificate, especially during the pandemic? Because we are attached to patients from quite some time, and we have been seeing over years many of our patients. But because of the pandemic, you cannot go in person. Can we send a snapshot of this medical certificate? Is it legally valid? Dr. Divya, I'll allow you to speak. Sorry for interrupting in between. Yeah.
No, I see medical certificates are allowed if this doctor has actually seen the patient and it's a valid document, because whatever certificates we issue on our letterheads, they're all legal documents. It can be an OP prescription, it can be a discharge summary, it can be a consent, it can be anything for that matter, including a bill that we generate in our clinics or hospitals. They're all legal documents. So unless until we are sure that this is not misused and this is valid and I have provided the consultation, generally these medical certificates I wouldn't recommend. If the doctor has actually seen the patient and then is rest assured that I can issue this medical certificate and it will not be misused, then the certificate can be given. Just
can it be given digitally? Can it be given digitally? We have queries on adoption certificates, the patients requesting for fitness certificates, adoption certificates. entry to the border, certificates pertaining to fitness for vaccination, can we give all these certificates digitally? That's what is the query.
The patient has, I mean, the person has to be examined, right? I mean, you cannot just write.
Correct. That's the concern. Yeah.
Correct. See, when we open vaccination centers here, we set up, the BBP is very particular about setting up a vitals room. So we had to set up a vitals room. Everybody, we had to screen their vitals and then only, send them to the pre-counseling area. So vitals have to be checked before we certify, for vaccination. So remotely giving certificates, without actually checking on the patient, I wouldn't recommend.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Divya and Dr. Naresh Chawla. What a solid combination of both of you to enlighten us on medical legal awareness. Over to Dr. Srividya for vote of thanks, probably to end the session.
Hello, everyone. It's a very, very interesting session we had. I'm sure there were a lot of queries, and I'm sure there are a lot of queries to come. I hope Dr. Samya will coordinate and help us answer more questions if it comes later on in WhatsApp. But I really thank Dr. Divya, Dr. Chawla from FPI Karnataka team. Very interesting session at this current times, and we all really benefited. It also highlighted how common things can turn to the other side if we don't address it properly. So thank you all, and we would like to have you all again at some point, and Samya, our scientific head, will take care of that, I'm sure. Thank you once again, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Divya and Dr. Naresh.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good session.